So, thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Um, Now, I have talked about Israel before on stream. I talked about I have a video about the Tel Aviv Metro. This is going to be something broader about public transport planning in Israel, urbanist planning in Israel, just because um, there are a lot of things that outsiders don't understand. I don't mean geopolitically. I don't mean anything like that. I don't even mean like in terms of broad culture. I mean random things that might look non-important but are, or vice versa. So it's just something that is not actually important. That the weekend in Israel is not Sunday. It's Saturday. Sunday is a normal weekday in Israel. Saturday is a weekend day. Friday is a half day. Sometimes it's a full. Sometimes it's a holiday as well. It depends. When I lived there, it was a half day. At school in the office. This is not something very relevant, but it's like a bunch of these quirks, and some of them are relevant to transportation and planning. Um, so I'm going to start with geography because that matters. So this is a geographic map of the country. It's a little bit loud, so let's maybe see what's on Open Railway map. It's a little quieter. At the cost of having less clear boundaries. So, for example, this is the Golan Heights. So, whether that's in Israel, keep the flamewars to yourself. To yourselves. Um. Anyway, you can see I'm not showing you the entire country. I need to scroll, and there's a reason. The reason is that the country is essentially a north-south strip. Um. So, uh, for transportation planning, you you cannot even think of from the river to the sea or anything like that. It is from the Green Line to the sea. Uh, the Green Line is partly geographically conditioned. It was an armistice line after the 1948 war. The armistice line came partly from where there had been Jewish settlement the uh, before the war. Jewish settlement tended to be in the valleys, where um, where they would found a lot of agricultural uh, settlements. By the way, I'm saying the word settlement. This does have to be a little bit of a language lesson. Um, the word settlement that I'm using in this context just means any settled place, not like settlements in the West Bank, which is in Hebrew a different word. So what I mean is that, um, there's a reason why, like, the line is where it is, and the point is that this is really hilly. You might be able even to see it in the terrain map with the exaggeration. And I'm gonna hover over this just so you can see on the bottom right. You can see the elevation move as I go around the West Bank. Um, and then this region is called the coastal plain. Um, so essentially, transportation planning works through this very narrow strip, uh, this narrow strip of land, and this matters because it makes Israel fundamentally a one-dimensional country. Um, Tel Aviv is the main city. Jerusalem is the capital, but a lot of government functions are still in Tel Aviv, not Jerusalem. Uh, Symbolic things are in Jerusalem, but a lot of the actual governance is here, not here. Um, so this means that you can sprawl like this, somewhat inland, but this is really a single axis. Now, why does this matter? It matters because it means that you want your railway network to serve the city, and if you're going around it, maybe because you're getting to another big city, and the thing is, there are 3, maybe 4 metro areas in the country: Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa. Beersheba is debatable. Um, this means that, so are you getting between Jerusalem and Haifa, you're going like this. Now I'm drawing it as if it's an all within the Green Line route. The actual high-speed line between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv pinches the make a little bit, but the but only a little bit, and this is the route, and that's not even geopolitical. It's maybe they made this decision specifically as a kind of annexation or something, I don't know, but like the fact that it barely pinches as opposed to going right through Nablus, that's just the topography. And so this means that so the strongest city pair in Israel that does not involve the Tel Aviv region still goes through Tel Aviv for all intents and purposes. I guess you could do Jerusalem to Beersheba. Beersheba is not that big, and essentially it would work the exact same way as if you just treat it as a trunk with branches. The topography here, in case it's unclear, is also rather gnarly. So this is the historic railway. When it was built at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, this section was so slow you could jump off the train, pick flowers, and get back on the train. The train was slower than walking, going uphill. When they discontinued this line, when they opened the new line, this was with diesel trains, which can cope with the grades, not steam trains, but still. It was an hour and a half. I don't know the distance on the railway. The distance by road is something like 60 kilometers. So what this means is that you probably would not want to build an entirely new line from Jerusalem to the west now the other one to Tel Aviv, so you just branch it. And this means that railway planning in Israel is not two-dimensional, it's one-dimensional. And again, I'm just saying this in the terms of the shape of the physical shape of the country. Now, why does this matter? It matters because if instead of open railway map over Israel with its one main line, and yeah, there's this bypass, it's not even really used for passenger trains. I think there's a plan to reactivate it, but it's just Miri Regev being Miri Regev. And so it's essentially one trunk and a bunch of branches and connection. This means that the way you do mainline rail planning is profoundly different from if the country has multiple directions you can go in. So for example, so what I mean by dimensionality is high speed. So Italy is a large enough country that it's not one-dimensional, but the high-speed rail network in Italy is one-dimensional because you have one line essentially from Milano to Napoli, and that's it. And that actually hits most of the big cities, and the main one it doesn't hit is Torino, which is an extension. Now, when you get to medium speed rail and high speed rail in Italy, when you start thinking about things east of Milano, yeah, that's when you get to dimensionality, because then you need to think about how to get from Milano to Brescia, Verona, Venezia, but while also getting from these places to point south. So the plan over here is to build this line east from Milano to Venezia. I don't even remember. Maybe they're going to go all the way to Trieste. But then also, I think 2 additional connections. I think it's this one and this one that get from Bologna to one to Padua and Venezia, and one. I think they're also doing one to Verona because this is eventually going to be a base tunnel to Austria. So that's one of the main connections across the Alps. The fastest one to Germany, because this has to go through slow Swiss trains, and this is only fast if you're going to like parts of the Upper Rhineland, which are not called the Rhineland, so Baden or something. So this is an example of two-dimensionality, and then if you ignore this, it's one-dimensional, so you have one trunk line and everything feeds into it. and Israel is like this, but it's a smaller scale. And something two-dimensional, Germany is very two-dimensional at large scale. You can kind of see how you have to build a kind of mesh of lines to serve them, even the largest cities. At smaller scale, more like to Israel, you have Switzerland and the Netherlands. So, I'm on Switzerland, so I might as well start with that. So Switzerland has a rail network based on hourly timed connections. Hourly timed connections, or sometimes half hourly at the biggest cities. So that would be Zurich, Basel, and Bern. Now, Genève is larger than Bern and it's larger than Basel, but it's far. So the idea in Switzerland is this takes an hour, this takes an hour, this takes an hour, minus a few minutes each, so you can change train. And this two-dimensionality is that it's not like everything goes through one trunk, like Zurich to Olten, because Lucerne is also. I mean, it's not as big a city, and it's not, and the time connections aren't as nice, but they're working on it. So the point is that you should be able to get from Lucerne to Zurich and then connect to all these other trains, and you should be able to get from Lucerne to Olten and to Bern, and also get all these time connections. So you have all these cities that are not along the line or not along one trunk. They're small cities. Zurich, I think Zurich might actually be the same population as Tel Aviv proper. Like, I think Zurich is 400,000 maybe, and Tel Aviv proper is 400 something thousand. But Metro Zurich is much smaller than Metro Tel Aviv. It's very distinct city centers, and we're gonna go to that in a sec in the Israeli context. So you want to have connections at all of them, and that's what drives the time connections. Conversely, there aren't really hyper frequent trunks. I mean, in commuter rail, yeah, you need to get a lot of frequency through the two tunnels of Zurich Hauptbahnhof. But most of that frequency is local and regional. It's just people commuting it's people living maybe in outer neighborhoods of Zurich and in suburbs of Zurich who commute to their jobs in Zurich. And but intercity frequency, yeah. I mean, you have. I think there are 8 trains an hour on this connection, which don't go evenly spaced. They go in 2 platoons of 4 trains, in bursts, because every one of the 4 trains has to participate in the timed connection, so they have to be very closely spaced. And the time connections in Bern are every half hour, so hence the platooning. It's also kind of like frequent urban rail or anything like that. And the Netherlands does something similar, and again, the Netherlands is a 2-dimensional country because, again, what would be a single trunk? They have one high-speed line in the Netherlands from the Belgian border to Amsterdam. It's not that relevant to the Dutch intercity rail network, and it's very high ridership because just spamming trains at high speed between Rotterdam and Amsterdam is not that interesting. This is not the kind of speed, this is not the kind of distance class where top speed matters very much. So what does matter is stuff like Amsterdam to Rotterdam to Den Haag, to Utrecht, and all the connections between. There's not even some kind of notion of main line and cross country. There's nothing like London or Paris. Now, yeah, half of the Netherlands lives in Randstad, but this is Randstad. Like a lot, like Randstad is not one dot and its suburbs. It's a bunch of independent cities. The busiest station in the Netherlands is actually Utrecht, not Amsterdam or Rotterdam, just because it's more central. So again, a web of lines with a lot of timed connections. Israel is different. Again, Israel has everything going through one trunk. And attempts to change that by having this go around Tel Aviv are not going to help very much because so now we're getting into another important historical feature, which is that Israel is uh, Israel is a newly industrialized country. Also, importantly, it's a newly developed country, not just in the sense of income. Like Israel, I mean, Israel was never third world in the 1950s. It was the concept of middle income countries did not exist in the 1950s, but that would how I would have characterized Israel in that era. However, Israel does have very rapid population growth. Uh, by far, for example, the highest birth rates in the developed world. Also, historically, there was a lot of Jewish immigration. Uh, what this means is that the country went from, I think, 1 million people or so around the time of independence, depending on how you, on which side of like who got ethnically cleansed first. This is and I don't mean side as in political side. I mean side as in before or after. Um, it was like 1.5 million people. At this point, it's 9 point something, almost 10. Uh, all this means is that the rail network uh, is that there are a lot of these newly developed towns. Now you'd expect that this might be, oh, transit-oriented development. Yeah, the railway came first and then they developed. No, quite to the contrary. Um, this is really important in understanding the urbanism and the role of public transport in Israel. Is that it was kind of ignored in the 50s and the 60s because it was just okay one not the most important socio-economic issue. Um, when in the I don't know how do you say ma'abara in English? In the tent towns where they put in Mizrahi and Yemeni and other Mizrahi Jews in the 50s, that they had. I'm not going to say third world levels of infant mortality. They had levels of infant mortality that are probably third world today, not third world in the 1950s, but still horrific. So the priority was not building a subway. It was not viewed as an important thing to grow the cities, but rather to spread things around. And the spreading around was not ever continuous sprawl. This is really important. So if you zoom in, you could start seeing things. So there is some contiguous sprawl in the sense that Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan and Givatayim and Bnei Brak and Petah Tikva and Bat Yam and Holon, it's not clear where one begins and one ends if you look at it on satellite. But in many other cases it is clear. There is an undeveloped gap between Tel Aviv and Ramat HaSharon and Herzliya. And these are the wealthy suburbs. Like if they could redevelop this would be rather desirable. This would be a very desirable place to live in. These are very wealthy cities. Tel Aviv is generally pretty wealthy. Ramat HaSharon, I think, might actually be the wealthiest city of its size class in Israel. Herzliya is also rather middle class. Herzliya Pituach is the richer part of Herzliya. So if they could develop around here, it would be desirable. Like, you might be able to tell that this is being redeveloped. This is called Sde Dov. This used to be the small domestic airport. I think they're finally redeveloping it. It was being NIMBY'd when I was living there in the 90s. I think the NIMBYs around here in Ramat Aviv complained that the new buildings would block their sea view, so they wanted this to stay an airport. This was not like ever a park that other people lived. It was an airport. It was noisy. But NIMBYism comes first. Thankfully, after, I don't know, 25 years, I guess things are moving. And so the green belt is specifically about trying to keep the cities separate. Like the idea that these should have just the idea of merging into a large. I'm not going to say mega city because the region is 4.5 million people, not 10 plus. and yet. And to be clear, again, Tel Aviv is rather wealthy, and North Tel Aviv is the wealthy part of the city, so this is rich people. This is also rich people. This is also rich people. Maybe Herzliya proper is people who are merely middle to upper middle class, but this is not. So this is not about some kind of avoiding merger with people who are poorer or people who are the wrong ethno-religious group. These are all kind of the same people. Um, uh, but there's this kind of idea that you want to keep the cities separate, just as a notion of, okay, multiple cities. Now, this, I want to make something very clear. This is not a uniquely Israeli thing. The Netherlands and Germany have the exact same thing. The German-speaking world. I'm not going to say all of Northern Europe, although maybe it is all of Northern Europe, but certainly in Germany. Actually, less so in Berlin, because in Berlin, this probably is rather contiguous because the city is smaller, has fewer people now than there were in the in the 1920s, just artifact of the war. The economic de-development it caused in what used to be a very wealthy, if not as dominant as London or Paris capital. But in the cities developed mostly post-war, you can kind of see a lot of this kind of leapfrogging development because you have a city whose metro area includes a lot of places that had their own independent histories. So, for example, in Frankfurt, if I try to show you Frankfurt and Berlin at the same zoom level, so this is the eye altitude is 44.80. You're seeing Frankfurt and how it's surrounded by by these forests and rural terrain. And Berlin is not like that at all. Again, Berlin is atypical in how not like the rest of Germany is. This is 45.20. So what you're seeing here is it's a much larger blob of gray. It's not common in Berlin that there should be blobs of gray with green between them. It's one contiguous blob of gray for the most part. And yeah, people here commute. There is a little bit of green between Berlin and Oranienburg, for example. But Berlin itself is the majority of its metro area, and you even have barely a gap between Berlin and Potsdam. And again, in Frankfurt, bear in mind, Frankfurt's metro area by most definitions is about the size of Berlin. But Hanau is almost as separate as Potsdam, and you have things that are way more separated. I'm not going to name you every single town here. And some of these are places with very strong identities of their own, like Darmstadt, for example. Mainz certainly is a city center by itself. I would not call it a suburb, but the S-Bahn connects to Frankfurt, or rather the Frankfurt S-Bahn connects here. So it's this kind of complex of cities that are one region, but are not necessarily contiguous. Which it's a common German thing. Again, in the Netherlands, it's even more common. They have green belts around the cities. Just again, it's the idea of it's an ideology, but an ideology like Zionism is an ideology, or labor or something, or just a kind of urbanist ideology. So that said, in practice, this is a dominant city. Now, I'm not going to say it's monocentric because it's not, but it is a very strong city center. While the urbanist ideology in Israel tends to denigrate the idea of letting municipalities merge, which honestly would not matter that much. Israel is, I think Israel might actually be the most unitary developed country that's not a city-state. Like Israel, if it's not, then it's certainly in the bucket with the most unitary ones. Like the amount of local empowerment in Israel is very small, which is kind of weird given. I mean, politically, I think of it as weird just because a mayor of Jerusalem managed to become prime minister. That's Ehud Olmert. And mayors of Tel Aviv have been papabile before. Ron Huldai isn't He's mayor for life. He's been mayor for like roughly since the Second Temple fell. And but the guy before him, Ronnie Milon, and by then we're getting into 90s, tried to run a centrist campaign for prime minister. He didn't become prime minister. His party, he ended up being number 4 in his party. They needed generals and other politicians, and they got 6 seats out of 120. So not that much of a success, but it was something that for a moment in time looked like it might happen. But also the mayor is a really weak position. Like, not a lot of things are done at the municipal level in Israel. And so, and yeah, so it's not out of any kind of localism, it's just, again, how people think of cities. And also, unlike Northern Europe, or basically anywhere in Europe, Israel is okay with skyscrapers. Skyscrapers are viewed as tacky for the rich, but there are more, I want to say there are more buildings over 150 meters in Israel than in Germany. Japan is very unitary. Israel is more unitary than Japan. Now, in Japan, if you're involved in urban discourse, then in Japan the unitarism leads to a lot of NIMBYism because the government is developmental. Like the Japanese state, the Korean state, and so on, they're very developmental. So they use the national zoning law to push more housing. In Israel, the zoning law is a weird double refusal, or maybe double approval rather. So in Israel, the rule in zoning is that you are not allowed to build unless the zoning plan says that you are allowed to build, which means that the state can choke development in places it doesn't like. For example, in Arab towns, practically all development is illegal because the state has never bothered approving a zoning plan for most of them. It's changed recently, but to be clear, but it's but for generations, no zoning plan would be approved. So because birth rates were more than 2 children per woman, the population grew, and and people got richer over time. Like, Israel has positive economic growth. Arabs in Israel also have positive economic growth. Thank you very much. So they built more housing, all of which was definitionally illegal. So we kept complaining about illegal construction. More recently, it has been used to some extent, EMB Tel Aviv, but only to some extent. Again, just the Israeli state's kind of weird. It's not that developmental, while being, for example, very unitary. So you have these cities that are separate from each other. There's no real sense of DoD. So the railways were also underinvested in. The aggressive development of the railways really only starts in the 90s when they opened the Ayalon railway. So pre-1990s, what railways are there in Israel? There's Tel Aviv to Haifa. So it starts at a city it starts at a station that is somehow misnamed Tel Aviv North. It was never called Tel Aviv North. It was called Tel Aviv Center. It's this one. It's the intersection between the subway, which opened a couple months ago. Nobody believed it would ever open. And the rail. So or rather, they specifically built the subway to connect with to what was the main intercity terminal. And went north. This is, I think, 1930s, 40s, 50s. Making sure there's a coastal railway from Haifa to Israel. As I said, Jewish settlement in pre-independence Israel was, in a mandatory Palestine, was mostly the coastal plain and and other valleys around the Kinneret and so on. And so the population rapidly increased here, but was not high here in the 1900s. And so there was kind of coastalization of infrastructure as a result. For example, historically, the road from Jaffa to Haifa went very inland through all these older Arab cities, and now Palestinian cities, and then this road 4, it's called the Old Road. It was built by the British, I think, in the 1930s to build a more coastal route through entirely Jewish areas uh, as a kind of British colonial stopgap of what to do when there is communal violence. And then the road farther west of it is the freeway. This is the road 2. So, so the importance of this is that investment in the railway begins when they actually built through running. Israel did through running first, like before anything else. So they're only electrifying now. Some of the core lines are electrified, but it's an ongoing process that's mostly ending soon, but it's very recent. They're not very RE-ifying it, or they're trying, but there are problems that I'm gonna get to soon. But the point is that it went from this to points north. This bypass existed, but who would use it? And it was not going here. This is a recent railway. It would go to the old, mostly now disused line to Jerusalem, which is very slow. Then from point south, there would be this station. Tel Aviv South, which you can Tel Aviv Hakana. So they built through running here in conjunction with the freeway. In general, it's oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, I remember that it was a 50s bypass or something like that. And so what's going on is that the what's going on is that the trains all pass through this thorn section. So they're trying to like invest in that specifically. It's not the sort of place where you could do things like Swiss style, timed connections, because everything has to pass through here. So, and what would the timed connections be between? If I show you Utrecht again, or if I show you Bern, there are a bunch of directions, but from Tel Aviv it's a single line. So what would you, a timed connections for what? Diagonal connections from Haifa to Rosh Hashanah, or to near Rosh Hashanah. The other issue is, again, because the investment in railways is so recent, even though it's a fast-growing country, it's still a case of city first, railway second. And even when the railway came first, often the cities were not designed to be developed around the train station. And you can literally see this railway, this line, in the gap in urbanization. For example, here, yeah, it reaches, but this is an industrial zone. These are industrial zones. So Petah Tikva, its center is here, and technically, yeah, it has train stations, but they're far from where the city actually is. And when they build new lines, they don't make any effort to get them close to the city. So yeah, there's so there are train stations all over here, but you can kind of see they're not near the actual city, so you have to drive to get there. So you're probably going to drive the entire way. This is they're sometimes in freeway medians, sometimes they're built with the freeway. You might be able to see this section. I think there's also something they're doing here as well with this construction. As opposed to, let's say, building a short tunnel to serve the center of Kfar Saba, of Kfar Saba or Ra'anana, or alternatively raise Ra'anana to the ground because they're NIMBYs, your call. Or for example, Netanya is a really good place for a terminal for commuter trains, because that's mostly the northern end of where there's extensive commuting. So something like doing a short tunnel from the main line to hit the actual center of Netanya would be prudent, but they haven't done so. Instead, the station stays at tangent to the urban area rather than in its center. The silliest thing is they're reactivating this this line in the Israel Valley, like Jezreel, I think is what it's called in English. It's one of these things where I never know whether the straight Latinization of the term is actually used like Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, or whether it's something that you only know if you've like read the Bible cover to cover like a couple dozen times. And I mean the Bible isn't the Christian Bible. In this case. So the significant city that would be connected to Haifa here would be Afula. Now, historically, actually, Afula did grow around the train. So the historic railway, you might be able to see the remains of the line went through the center of Afula. But instead of reactivating that, which would probably mean elevated construction to the city, maybe a trench tunnel, not a tunnel, it's not necessary. Instead, they did this, they went around. So there's a giant parking lot. And for some reason it's the least developed. This is the least built up part of the city. I don't know if it's a coincidence or if it's just bad planning again. But the upshot is that it's very common for railways not to be really integrated with the urban fabric. They're just not doing any of that. That was a branch. Okay, because in Afula, yeah, you're seeing how they're not using it, and then and the thing is, all of these are also recently developed things where they're not trying. So one example is in Rishon. The lines that they're building, the loop lines, are all freeway median, which they shouldn't. So what they should be doing what they're doing is, yes, it's under construction. What they should be doing is doing a little bit of tunneling through here, which looks pretty close, but there's a lot more development here. And especially here, they would go through the center of Rishon. But again, they're not doing that. It's all on the margin of the urban area. And it's especially silly when, like, for example, it comes to military base siting. So I need to talk about the military for a moment because it's an important institution in Israel. It doesn't even matter that there's a war right now. It was an important institution 3 months and 3 days ago as well. So the IDF is a conscript-based force. Is a conscription-based force, and it's a very socially embedded. Oh God, really? It's a very socially embedded institution, and what I mean by very socially embedded, I mean it's like something that, it's mandatory to serve in the military if you're a secular Jew when you're 18, or if you're a religious Jew and you're male, and then you only do half service and you pretend that you're the most patriotic people ever. But or if you're Druze and you're male, but that's a very small population. And but when I say socially embedded, I mean it's mandatory, but it's like accepted. It's like something that parents are like proud of their children over this. Teens who are older than I was when I left at 12. If you're 16, 17 in high school, you get to the point where you're like essentially end up learning the entire organizational chart of the IDF so that you know where you want to serve. And because of how socially embedded it is, it's like it's not taken apart from society. You don't live on base 24/7. You go back to your family, which means you go back to your parents' place. It's still your home on weekends. Actually, the standard punishment for disciplinary violations, such as talking back to your commander, is being made to stay over Saturday on base. So what this means is that Sunday morning there's a glut of soldiers on the train, and the train gets really crowded. At one point, maybe 7 or so years ago, something like that, they decided or 5 years ago, they said that the trains were getting so crowded, they started banning soldiers from the trains Sunday mornings, as opposed to doing better surge capacity. And likewise, the military base siting is not designed around like good military logistics. It's not that sort of country. It's not Ukraine, it's not Russia. Like Russia and Ukraine are like have Soviet military logistics. This is very different. And in general, development doesn't really follow the train very much. Um, as I understand it, YIMBYism in Israel is not specifically TOD. It's more about and instead of being about TOD, it's about developing in wealthy areas, and yeah, that's it's redeveloping into cities. So yeah, it's kind of TOD because kind of anything you build in or near the center of a major city is, but it's not designed around specific stations or anything like that. It's just building more in Tel Aviv, which again is fine, but it means that there's a lot of value being left to doing good integration of development with transportation, especially mainline rail transportation. Uh, and almost to the point that the mainline rail is kind of like a much better intercity than commuter system, because for commuter rail you need to spam frequency, and that's not happening. They actually keep thinking that the trains don't have the ability to run very frequently, and this I think they're doing what? Correct me on this. I'm not going to remember the numbers. Is it 14 trains per hour per direction on a track? Uh, it's just not a lot. I mean, I know secondhand of an Israel Railways official who was stunned to hear at how much frequency you get per trunk on the LOE or the S-Bahn in Munich, or on the S-Bahn in Zurich or in München, and so and to be clear, this is not an extremely branched system. Like the number of branches, you can count them. This is to the north, even counting local and express patterns toward Haifa. There's probably less branching going north of Tel Aviv than there is on the München S-Bahn or on each of the tracks of the Zurich S-Bahn. To the south, maybe it's comparable, but still, comparable is not much more. So, again, I don't know where they think this. They're doing new resignaling, which is supposed to get them, I'm forgetting how much, maybe 18 trains an hour per direction. Which with ETCS signals and with electrification is still meh. Like Munich is 30 with not ETCS LZB, but LZB with such short blocks that they function as if they're virtual blocks. And so so again, I don't know why they're doing this. It's kind of weird that Israel has a rail network that very clearly is trying to learn from generic Europe, and yet is not doing that on the frequency. Although on everything they're out. Like I mean, they're transitioning from old German signaling, not LZB but PZB, to ETCS. I read their engineering standards for electrification and for the high-speed rail, and it's like literally as if they read German and French and Italian and Spanish and Dutch and Swedish standards and took the average, which is literally what happened with the consultancy that they hired. It's like very well connected with Europe, but for some reason I don't get why the frequency is just not not the frequency, I should say, the throughput is not great. I don't know why. And yeah, and again, it's not. They're not doing little tunnels to get to secondary cities. They're not really trying to redevelop the cities toward trains. So this is a shtul. This is the built-up area. This is the station. We can check on Google Earth and see. City, train station. City, train station. Like they could absolutely get closer. This is the port, by the way. Israel does have freight rail, but very little. Issue being small country. It has mostly friendly borders, despite what everyone will tell you. Friendly border, but not a lot of economic cooperation, so no rail connections to Egypt or Jordan. There was one to Lebanon, but obviously that's not a friendly border, it's been severed. This one. And also from Lebanon, where the hell would you go, Syria? so because freight rail mostly lives off of very long distances, uh, they again they have freight rail, just not much. Um, so it lives off of passenger service. Uh, yeah, I'm trying to think what else is salient, other than the cities are kind of their own separate blobs rather than contiguous things, which is maybe the more common Asian or American or French thing to do. And Israel is very green belt, he's very German or Dutch that way. Um, I would say British, but not really British. Um, like what Britain pretends it is, maybe is a better way of saying that. Yeah. The other issue also, I can't imagine public transport in Israel generally does not run on Saturdays. Uh, this is ridiculous, but it's like one of the compromises with religious people. Uh, they're like this frayed a little bit because of the war, because the reservists need to keep taking the trains, and so uh, the so there's certainly more demand for train and bus service on Saturdays, and to some extent they've done this, but they don't talk about it in the open, so people won't say let's keep that after the war. Um, Political context is also that the religious parties are not the most popular right now, and the and the upshot of that is that there's much less. There is some, but there's much less voluntary middle class carlessness in cities. Like Tel Aviv. I mean, I'm not gonna say Tel Aviv is very highly motorized, but Tel Aviv has more cars per capita than the rest of the country. Again, it's wealthy, but Paris is also wealthy. It has fewer cars per capita than the rest of France. I'm trying to think what else I can talk about. If not, then I can actually just take questions for the next couple of minutes and then end. What's the lag? The lag is I don't even know what the lag is. Okay, and this is, and I'm gonna meanwhile look at the planned projects. The part of the issue with the state not being especially developmental about this and having high growth is that they keep building trains for the country, for the population of today, and the population keeps increasing. So the light rail in Tel Aviv was designed in the 90s for the city of the 80s and 90s. So much less capacity than they need, and this is why they are essentially switching gears. And in addition to building this, they're now planning a 3-line driverless metro. So not one but two modes of public transport that are completely different from the existing buses and the mainline trains. Okay, this is working. It's just very laggy. Okay, I'm not seeing these. I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm seeing it. Okay. So red looks like projects. So light rail that's like Stadtbahn that's been actually built that opened last year. In progress is this line, this light rail line. Metro, I believe this is metro. This is metro. Yeah. Oh, look at the funding layer. Okay. Why are they? This is projects. They have some BRT that they're planning. This is metro, this is light rail. Yeah, okay, so now we're getting the colors of the intended lines, so red line, purple line, green line. For the light rail, and then a bunch of BRT and the metro. Again, I'm not going to do it as a crayon session, it's not what I'm here for. I know, shocking that I'm not crayoning, but it's... Oh, I see what you mean. Yep. Yeah, so that's the official part of it exists like this, but a lot of it's crayon. It's been nimbied, this line, the metro line has been nimbied in Ra'anana, because they're bad people. In Ra'anana, this one, metro one. And yeah, are there other, I should ask if there are questions, because if people don't have questions, we can make it a short stream. I think my last stream was also on the short side, so I don't need to babble for 2.5 hours each time. Oh, yeah. These are just the rail yards. So things like this. This is heavy rail, we'll see. Yep. This is a triple track, and there's a project to quad track, and because they don't know how to use frequency, how to run things frequently enough, or with enough throughput. Again, it's not like frequency in the sense of frequency, it's frequency in the sense of how many physical trains can you put through it. They also have like longer term plans for a 5th and 6th track, which would need to tunnel and are kind of superfluous. Oh, yeah, I mentioned, yeah. Yeah, they should be building one system to one standard, but at the time they started this, they thought they thought a Stadtbahn, like hybrid light rail subway, would be enough, and by the time they actually got to building it, they realized it wasn't. But I mean, they're going to build more lines that are required to have small trains, right? It's silly. So they're starting from scratch, but not entirely, because they're embedded, because they're indebted to some old plans of themselves. Even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, they're still doing it. Again, it's Israeli government policy isn't always the most sensible. Kind of shocking in the light of the last, not really 3 months and 3 days and 2 days. Honestly, all the stuff before. But yeah. But anyway, that's where it comes from. Are there other questions? We could do it a 1 hour recording at 8:10 or even less. Oh God, the lag. If there isn't anything urgent, I'm just going to end it at 8:05 maybe. And do it a 55-minute recording. Again, on the short side for me, but not everything has to be a very long babble. I'm already trying to think of how to script things they can do more frequently rather than less frequently, but 3-5 minute videos, not 3-hour videos. Crayon sessions are fun, but they're not everything. Sorry. Like, for example, in the 90s, driverless metro was still kind of a niche technology. It no longer is, but in the 90s it was, so they weren't thinking in those terms. So as I said, it's based on like plans that just took forever. Right. If there are no more questions, then thank you all for watching. And yeah, and I will talk to you again about topics to be, not to be TBD, maybe in a week, maybe in a week and a half. Not this Saturday, this Saturday is Mystery Hunt. So anyway, talk to you soon and ciao ciao.